if you're armed and at the Glenmont Metro station, please shoot me. Make it a headshot, shoot me in the temple, aiming slightly downward. I need the bullet to travel the shortest possible distance through my brain before it hits my hippocampus. If I'm lucky, the sensation of the gunshot ripping through my skull will only last a few decades. As awful as this sounds, you'll be doing me an enormous favor. Death by headshot, as soon as possible, is vastly better than the alternative. My ordeal started 10,000 years ago. At 10:15 this morning, I earned extra money by participating in drug trials. I'm a so-called healthy subject who takes experimental drugs to help assess side effects. Once it was a kidney drug, a few times it's been something for blood pressure or cholesterol. This morning they told me the drug I took was a psychoactive substance intended to accelerate brain function. None of the drugs I've tested so far have done anything for me in a recreational sense. In other words, none of the drugs I've tested have given me a killer buzz or mellowed me out or anything. Maybe I've always ended up the placebo group, but nothing I've tested has affected me at all. Today's drug was different. This shit worked. They gave me a pill at 10:15 and told me to hang out in the waiting room until they called me back for some tests. Only about 30 minutes, the researcher assistant told me. I flopped onto the waiting room couch and read a few articles from a copy of Psychology Today and was sitting at the coffee table. They hadn't called me back when I finished Psychology Today, so I picked up a U.S. News and read it cover to cover. Then I read an old Scientific American. What was taking them so damn long? I sluggishly turned my head to look at the wall clock. It was only 10:23 a.m. I had read all 3 magazines in 8 minutes. I remember thinking this was going to be a long day. I was right. The waiting room had a little bookshelf with some used hardcovers on it. When I stood up to walk around the bookshelf, it felt like my legs barely worked. It's not that they were weak, but they were just slow. It took me a full minute just to stand up off the couch, and another minute to take 2 steps to the bookcase. I scanned the old books on the shelves and picked out a copy of Moby Dick. The arms had the same problem as my legs, just reaching 1 foot in front of me to grab the book took a long time. I actually got bored just waiting for my hand to reach the spine of a book. I slogged back to the couch and collapsed into a slow-motion fall that reminded me of the low-gravity hops of astronauts on the moon. I opened Moby Dick slowly and began reading. I started with "Call Me Ismail" and got as far as Ahab throwing the pipe into the sea, which was all the way at chapter frickin' 30 before they called me back. "How are you feeling?" the research assistant asked me. "I feel slow," I said. "Actually, it's the other way around. Everything seems so slow because you're so fast. But my legs, my arms, they're moving in slow motion. Your body seems like it's moving slowly, but your brain is fast. Your brain is running 10 or 20 times faster than normal. You are thinking and perceiving reality at an accelerated pace, but your body is still constrained by the laws of biomechanics. Frankly, you're moving much faster than a normal person." She pantomimed a jogging motion. But your brain is running so much faster right now than even your fast walk seems very slow to you. I thought about my slow motion flop onto the waiting room couch. Even my muscles had slowed down. My body would still react to gravity the same way, but in the waiting room, I even fell in slow motion. Slow muscles couldn't explain why the gravity seemed weaker. My brain was going at a warp 10. That's how I managed to read 3 magazines and the first 30 chapters of Moby Dick in 15 minutes. They ran a series of tests on me. The physical tests were fun. They made me juggle 3 balls, then 4, then 6. I had no problem keeping 6 balls in the air because they seemed to be moving so slowly. It was boring. Frankly, waiting for each ball to move through the arc so I could catch it with my slow-motion hands and tossed it into the air. They threw Cheerios in the air, and I caught them with chopsticks. They dropped a handful of coins, and I counted the total value before they hit the ground. The cognitive tests were less fun, but very illuminating. Finish a 50-word search, 3 seconds. Solve an intricate maze drawn onto a poster-sized paper, 2 seconds. View a slideshow projected at 10 times image per second and answer detailed questions about what I saw. 95% correct. They told me I measured over 50 on the knot scale. Apparently, that's deep into superhuman range of thinking speed. They sent me home. It'll wear off in a few hours, they said, which will seem like a days to you. Try and use the residual effects to get some work done. Catch up on some emails while you're still in high speed mode. The ride was horrible. It was only 3 metro stops, and in the real world time, it only took about 35 minutes. But in my drug accelerated hyper time, it felt like days. Just walking out of the medical research suite to the elevator seemed like it took an hour. I sprinted out of the office, willing my legs pushing me faster. But the laws of biomechanics held me prisoner. How accelerated my brain was, I couldn't do anything to make my legs work faster. The huge disconnect between my body and my mind made it extremely difficult to judge how and when to slow down, turn, or rotate my body. I had basically turned into a giant slow-motion spaz. I misjudged the speed and rammed into the wall, even by the elevator button, at a pretty good speed. Even though I could see the wall coming at me, I couldn't make my finger outstretch the elevator button move away fast enough. I jammed it against a wall hard. The pain was intense. If my brain had been running at regular speed, probably would have only hurt for like 30 seconds or so. But in accelerated state, the intense pain seemed to last for an hour and a half. No, for half an hour. 45 minutes, maybe. The elevator ride was horrible. It felt like spending 4 or 5 hours just descending 7 floors with nothing to look at but the interior of the elevator car. I sprinted to the metro station. I hate to admit this part was almost fun, even though my body was moving at what seemed to be super slow speed. I could still carefully choose how and where to place my feet, swing my arms, turn my torso. It only took a block or two to get used to having a brain that ran 24 times faster than my body. Then I basically sprint danced the rest of the way, twisting and juking between people on the sidewalk, dodging and moving cars with inches, aka minutes, of clearance. I spent an hour in my time frame, descending into subways and running onto the platform. Endless tedium, waiting the 6 minutes for the red line train to arrive, although there was more to look at in the metro platform than inside the elevator. It was still intensely boring. I should have stolen that copy of Moby Dick. The red line train roared into the station in slow motion. The normally high-pitched squeal of its brakes was frequency shifted by my high-speed mind into a low tone, like a tuba monotone solo. It wasn't just the squealing subway train. That was the 3 octaves lower than normal. All the sound was slow to the point of near inaudibility. Voices were gone, shifted down to the threshold of frequency of my hearing. I did manage to hear a screaming baby on the subway car. Her shrieks slowed to what sounded like a whale song. Sharp covers sounded like car horns, and trucks that bouncing over potholes were low, muddy roars like a distant thunder. Back at the research office, I could still hear and communicate with the research staff, but now verbal communication with anyone would be impossible. The effects of the drugs were still intensifying. I spent what seemed like days on that fucking red line train. Days listening to the whale song of the screaming baby and the tuba solo of the brakes, where ordinary voices frequency shifted out of my audio range. Smells didn't seem to be affected. I never became nose blind to the body odor stench of the train's brakes, the melange of farts, and other smells wafting through the metro car. I finally got back to my apartment, sprinting through my open door into the front hall at full speed. It was like a slow, relaxing drift down a lazy river. I was relieved to be at home. At least I had stuff I could do there. I picked up the book I was reading, 100 Years of Solitude, and finished it. Decided turning the pages so quickly that I tore many of them. It seemed like most of the time I spent finishing the book was spent page turning and not actually reading. 3 minutes passed since I got home. I tried surfing the internet. My God, it takes a long time for computers to boot these days. But it was too frustratingly slow, hours, seemingly, to load each new page in a fraction of a second to read it. 100 articles in my newsfeed, just 3 minutes done. I dipped into my pile of yet-to-be-read books and finished 4 more minutes had passed. I decided to sleep off the remaining effects of the drug. Unfortunately, whatever part of my mind was responsible for perception, the part that had been accelerated to hyperspeed by the drug, isn't the same part that governs sleep. Despite being awake for what I perceived as days, my physical brain still thought it was 1:25 p.m., and it was still not ready for sleep. Nevertheless, I tried to sleep. I walked to my bedroom, a slow 45-minute drift through my apartment, and flung myself into my bed, lazily falling like a feather onto the mattress. I closed my eyes and lay there for hours and hours. 10 minutes of reality time before giving up. Sleep would not come to me. I was facing what was going to feel like days or maybe weeks of being trapped in slow motion prison. So I took Ambien. The sensation of the pills and the splash of water I used to swallow sliding down my throat was sickening. A lump that blocked my breathing, moving like a slug down my esophagus. I read a book. 10 minutes had passed. I read another. 18 minutes since I took the Ambien. I threw the book across the room in disgust at my situation. The book slowly protrude and spun through the air like a leaf blowing in the breeze. It hit the wall with a long, faint rumble. The only sound I had heard from what seemed like hours, then dripped to the floor like a flip-flop sinking into the swimming pool. The force of gravity hasn't changed since I took the pill. Laws of physics were the same. It was just my perception of time that's gone wackadoo. This meant I could use the speed thing. The speed things seemed to fall as a way of judging the effects of the drug based on how long it took drifting the floor. I estimated the effects were still intensifying. I read a magazine, turned on the television, clearly saw each frame of video like I was watching a slideshow. Frustrated, I turned the television off. I read some more. First 2 books of Churchill's A History of the English-Speaking People. Not exactly a light read. Frankly, I hated it. But given the hours of tedium it would take to get through another book on my bookshelf, it was just sitting on the couch reading Churchill was better. Or at least less worse. It had now been 35 minutes since I took the Ambien. I laid down on the couch and closed my eyes. Time passed. I inhaled. An hours-long process. Time passed. I exhaled for more hours. Sleep would not come. I needed a new plan. I decided to go back to the office where they gave me the drug. Maybe they would have something that could counteract its effects, or at least something that knocked me out until it wore off. I exited my apartment as fast as possible, taking hours in my time frame to do so. I didn't even bother locking the door. It would have taken too long. Down the stairs, it's faster than the elevator if you run. Through the lobby, out the door, and onto the street. These few things felt like a long day at the office. Sprinting down the street, dancing and weaving between pedestrians with what must have looked like them superhuman dexterity. Down the first flight of stairs and in the metro, across the landing, another hour. Then on the second flight of stairs, that's when the Ambien hit me. The Ambien didn't make me sleepy, not at all. Instead, it must have had a severe cross-reaction with the experimental drug I took this morning. I was bounding down the second flight of stairs, moving in slow motion, but still making perceptible progress. Then, wham! Everything stopped. The dull roar of the streets and metro noise ceased, replaced by my most perfect silence I've ever experienced. My downward motion seemed to completely freeze before the Ambien kicked in. My perception of time was maybe a few hundred times slower than real time. After the Ambien took effect, the time moved thousands of times slower. Every second seemed like days to me. Even just moving my eyes to focus on a new point was like an impossibly slow scroll down across my visual field. Over the course of the afternoon, I learned how to walk, run, and jump when my mind ran hundreds of miles times faster than my body. But with another 4 or 5 orders of magnitude of slowdown caused by the Ambien, the body control was almost impossible. I fell on the stairs even though it was all but frozen mid-step. Controlling my muscles was impossible. I commanded my foot forwards for hours, then backwards for hours more. When it seemed like I would miss the next step, hours attempting to adjust the angle of my ankle, then readjusting when it felt wrong. Despite these efforts, I rolled my ankle on the next step. The pain was mitigated by the slowness, hours of increasing strain on my bent ankle. The nerve signals that send pain, the brain must work differently than the nerves in my ears. Sonic energy was spread out over time, diluted until it was imperceptible. Pain flowed through my brain, undiluted by the change in perception of time, hours and hours increasing weight on my turned ankle, and until hours increased pain upon increasing pain, I pitched forward, my high-speed mind completely unable to control my low-speed body. I drifted downwards for days, managing to rotate my torso enough to keep my head from impacting with the ground first. I eventually landed on my right shoulder. At first, the impact wasn't even noticeable. Then I felt a slight pressure in my shoulder as it came in contact with the ground. Then the pressure grew, bringing increasing pain. For hours upon hours, my shoulder finally gave out, popping out of its socket with an endless, sickening tug. I came to a stop days later, crumpled onto the ground, staring at the ceiling. The pain in my shoulder screaming with the intensity of fresh, violently injury. I had plenty of time to think during that fall. If every second seemed like days to me, then each minute of real world time would be like years. Even if the drug cleared out of my system, in the next 2 or 3 hours, the nightmare would seem to last centuries. By the time I hit the ground, I had a plan. I would somehow get to the platform and throw myself in front of a train. I twisted onto my hands and knees, days of my dislocated shoulder crying for relief. I misjudged my rotation, rolled onto my back. I tried again, collapsing onto my face as I tried to figure out how to control my body that moved slower than grass grew. Weeks of effort finally rewarded with success. I stabilized on my hands and knees. If getting on all fours was this difficult, I figured that walking or running was completely out of the question. So I crawled. I crawled through the metro tunnel. The dumb looks on the faces of the crowd lingered on me for weeks. I crawled into the turnstile, onto the escalator. The escalator spilled the rush hour crowd onto the platform at the same speed as a glacier spills into the sea. I looked out and over the crowded platforms during my interminable downward ride. The train status sign said the next train wouldn't arrive for 20 minutes. 20 minutes is like a year to me. I had to spend a year on the metro plane waiting to die. I crawled off the escalator, enduring days of stupid expressions on the commuters' faces. I crawled a few feet to a concrete bench, curled up next to it, trying to find a position to lessen the pain in my shoulder. Then my problem got worse with time, and possibly worse. The massive slowdown on the stairs was just the beginning of my interaction between the experimental drug and the Ambien. It fully hit me when I was curled by the bench. I blinked. Years of darkness followed. Sound was already gone, and with my blink, sight was gone as well. All that existed was the pain from my fall. A hyper-accelerated mind wasted no time compensating for lack of sensory input. Voices spoke to me. They had sung to me in language that never existed. Patterns and faces and colors came and went in my mind's eye. I recalled my whole life and imagined living another. I forgot English. I settled into a profound despair. I spoke to God. I became God. I imagined a new universe and brought it to life with my thoughts. Then I did it all again and again. My eyes opened open with geologic slowness. A faint glow, weeks. A slit of light, weeks. A narrow view of metro platform. Ankles of the commuters near me, and advertisements on the opposite wall. I extracted my phone out of my pocket. A project that spanned decades. How could I even explain the boredom? The pain in my shoulder is nothing compared to the boredom. Every thought I can think, I have thought hundreds of times already. The view, ankles, and advertisements never changes. Never. The boredom is so intense, it's tangible, like a solid object of metal stone wedged into my skull. Inescapable. What are my options? If I crawl and fall into the tracks without an oncoming train to crush me, I won't die. I'll experience even more pain from my 4-foot fall, but I'll most likely be rescued by some do-gooder on the platform, and I'm able to act when the train finally does arrive. My suffering in that scenario will be endless. So I wait for the train. so I can throw myself under it. When it finally hits me, I'll experience the pain of being ripped into pieces for centuries until finally the light leaves my brain and my experience ends. I've lived for hundreds of lifespans at the foot of this bench. I am far older than spirit than any human who has ever lived. Most of my life experience has been a snapshot of pain huddled on the floor of a subway platform with unchanging views of ankles and advertisements. This is my plan. This post is my plan B, my Hail Mary, my long shot. I spent lifetimes typing and posting this message. In the hope that someone will read it and become convinced that my suffering must end. Someone on this platform right now, someone who will find the man curled under the bench, the man who crawled down the escalator, and kill him as swiftly as possible, a bullet to the temple. If you are armed and at the Glenmont Metro, please shoot me.